Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Derek Moretz, and I'm a second-year SEPA fellow here at Cornell. And today I want to talk about cities, their competitiveness in the labor market. And specifically, I wanted to determine what is a city's proper role in the labor market using systems thinking. So to begin, I wanted to go over how cities don't currently consider labor market needs. So over the summer, I did some research on best practices on what cities can do to enhance human capital in their borders. And what I found out during this research is that some cities don't even have a single department that look at labor force issues. In fact, half of the top 20 largest cities in the United States don't have a department that does this. And one of the contributing factors is that studies actually show economic development leaders consider workforce development as more so social work rather than economic development work. And so there's a sort of a bias against workforce development in cities. Now, using systems thinking, I wanted to understand if this is actually a problem. So specifically, what is the city's role in impacting the labor market in the context of promoting business, which is a big topic nowadays for cities? And especially when you consider all the tools in a city's toolbox to promote business, when you consider all the actors involved, so maybe another actor is taking care of workforce needs, and then also how does the current policy risk city prosperity? Now, I wanted to use the DSRP framework, which is composed of distinctions. I wanted to look at specifically the different tools that cities can use and how they affect different challenges. I wanted to also look at the systems that they're a part of, the relationships between policies and outcomes, and the perspective of actors and how that actually influences outcomes. So my starting point really was, what are the components of business success? And I said, well, it's product success, assuming that you have a market for your product. And I made 4 distinctions between these needs of employment needs. You have public service needs like paved roads, you have capital needs like machinery, and you have financial needs, simply being able to pay the bills each month. Now, for me, cities work to meet a lot of the needs of business and promote business success through the economic development system, which has 2 parts to it: the workforce development system and the sort of business development policy framework that they can utilize. So this is the most common tool. Business development policies are the really well-known methods that cities use to promote business. Taxation policy, subsidy assistance, industrial development. In New York State, hundreds of millions of dollars are funded by industrial development agencies to support infrastructure for industries, for example. There's, of course, city planning, regulatory policy, and public service enhancements that all go into serving business. Now, on the other side is the workforce development system. That's comprised of our K-12 system, community colleges, universities, as well as employment centers and workforce intermediaries. Now, I imagine that maybe the last 2 aren't components that you're really familiar with, so I'm going to break these down. Employment centers are where you can get training information or matching services. So say that you're unemployed or you don't think that you have skills that can get you a job. You might go to one of these centers to figure out who's employing and for somebody just like you. Now, workforce intermediaries, they're much more personal. They actually do trainings, they do counseling, they do matching service and employer incentives. So they might customize a training to fit the exact needs of an employer. In return, they hire their students. They might do benefits access, so making sure that all of the people that they serve have, for example, transportation so they can hold down work. And they might do networking and family empowerment as well to make sure that workers are successful. Now, these 2 components really serve a particular population, those who are in poverty and those who are oftentimes excluded from the workforce. So folks who have mental and behavioral or learning disabilities, people who have a lack of assets or a lack of marketable skills, people who may face systemic employment exclusion because of racism or sexism, for example, people who might have a lack of information, and also people who have criminal records. Now, employment centers address a couple of these needs, but employment intermediaries really address everything. So if you have, if you're poor and you need transportation, for example, they'll help you out. If you have a mental disability that keeps you from working as well, they cover those needs. Now, for me, when you actually fit this back into the workforce development system, they play a critical role. So ideally, resources come into your K-12 schools, and ideally, their success leads to folks going to career colleges and universities, building skills for their students who can go off and have stable employment. And ideally, under this system, not many people need employment centers or workforce intermediaries because the system works. Now, what happens if resources dry out? or for whatever reason, early ed doesn't work and there are less people that are going to community colleges and universities, all of a sudden the needs for employment centers and workforce intermediaries is very high. But this whole system actually becomes very complicated when you add in actors. So I picked out cities and states. States are really active in the labor in the workforce development system. They help fund our universities, they can even help fund our K-12 schools. And cities also can technically promote employment centers. Oftentimes they're put on their boards or they can fund them, and oftentimes they can give direct grants as well to workforce intermediaries. But they really like to focus on the business policy. Ideally, the economic development system meets the needs of business success. That leads to higher quality of life, the desirability of your city for business. That leads to higher property values, and this leads us to our third actor, which are school districts, which take taxes from property values and can also contribute it back into the workforce development system. Now, cities, remember though, they don't really perceive themselves as having a real role. That these employment centers or workforce intermediaries, that's social work, that's not economic development work. But we can actually see a big risk here open up. What happens if the state takes away some of its resources? Early ed may not function as well, and community colleges and universities may not have as many students or as much funding, and suddenly the need for employment centers and workforce intermediaries are really high. And as a result, nobody is really meeting this need unless you have a great nonprofit sector that's dealing with this. And suddenly business success, they don't have this component, their employment needs met. And as a result, the quality of life or the desirability of your city goes down. That could result in lower property taxes and less revenues going to your workforce development system. It creates a terrible resource death spiral. Now, if cities realize that they have a role in employment centers and workforce intermediaries, there could be a lot of remedial help for folks who aren't being served by the workforce development system. And that can help stave off any problems with meeting employment needs and help keep resources cycling back into your school system, for example. But this is where we see the really devastating effects that some actors can play in this system. If you're focused on business success, but you don't really understand employment needs, all of a sudden a huge component of business success is not being met. And if you're overemphasizing the role of states and school districts to fix this issue, then all of a sudden you're really opening up risk for your city that your businesses aren't going to have the needs that they require to succeed. So the lessons learned from systems thinking are really that cities are putting themselves at risk by leaving the labor market to the whims of other actors. Cities aren't using all the tools in their economic toolbox. And finally, understanding perspectives and the roles of others within these systems is really key to strategic planning for business development. Now, this was a fun thought experiment, but there are very practical implications to this. Cities that are very close to home, like Buffalo or Detroit, places like Cleveland, and for the longest time Pittsburgh, were always very reliant on other actors like the state for revenues and to meet, for example, human capital requirements in their cities. For me, this thought experiment has really shown the usefulness of systems thinking to understand the risks that cities are putting themselves into and the various relationships between the actors and the hopeful solutions to promoting business and welfare within your city. In conclusion as well, it really might be a good idea to know the benefits of being involved with labor market intermediaries, as this experiment has really shown.